Will, do you mind if I just share just an introductory slide about the Bridge Paediatrics Network first?
That might help. You can hear me now.
Ah, yes. Yes, the classic muted issue that we often get. It's obligatory, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've joined on two devices, Neil, so I've kind of like got, oh, okay, I can hear you, I was having an echo. So I can see the chat, by the way, guys, so that's great. So if you want to use the chat, that's fine. But you can hear and see me now, Neil, is that right?
Yes, we can. And your slides were coming through beautifully. I'll just give a little bit of a brief introduction to anyone who doesn't know what we're about, who's joined for the first time today. Welcome. This is the Yorkshire and Humber Bridge Paediatrics Research Network, where we put on some very exciting talks and offer some links to trainees across the region. So our aim is to advertise and signpost different opportunities to get involved in paediatric research across the region and beyond, as well as providing excellent educational opportunities like you're going to get today. We're in for a special treat today. Hopefully this network will broaden and allow for multi-centre audit, quality improvement and research projects to flourish in the region. But without further ado, I will pass on to today's inspirational speaker, who is Professor Will Carroll from the West Midlands, who is the well-known author of the Illustrated Textbook of Paediatrics. That is the typical undergraduate text for paediatrics, as well as postgraduate text like the master course Science of Paediatrics, amongst dozens, if not hundreds, of other publications. So we're hoping to learn some of the tips around how and why to get published and how to get involved in book chapters ourselves in the future. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Will. Thank you ever so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
No worries. Good afternoon, everybody. I can see the chat, so if you have questions as we go along, feel free to write in the chat. Also, if I suddenly stop making any noise or sound, I'm in clinic today, so I've got limited access to, I usually have 2 or 3 screens going so I can see faces. So I can't see your faces at the same time as I can see my presentation. So I'm going to have to just assume you're all paying attention. Slightly difficult. I'm going to tell you a story about getting published, and I'm going to tell you a bit of my own personal journey. I'm mindful of the fact that I'm speaking to the Yorkshire and Humber region, and I would say that one of the biggest one of the biggest gifts I've had in my life was given to me by the wonderful Simon Newell, who you may know from lecture notes in paediatrics, but was a eminent and wonderful neonatologist based in Leeds. And Simon Newell was instrumental in my journey to start writing books, really. And I tried for a while, and I hadn't succeeded. And I tried quite hard to get my own books off the ground, and I hadn't got there. And it was with Simon Newell's encouragement that I got my first book over the line. And my first book was, and my slides aren't moving forward, so that's fine because they're not meant to. But my first book was one called Clinical Cases for Theory and Science. And I guess the only way I can tell whether you're paying attention is just write in the chat. Has anyone read or used Clinical Cases for Theory and Science? Before I'll tell you the rest of the story. Chat function's good here because I can definitely see that. What we got? Join the chat. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Chido. Yeah, you've used it. Okay. So I quite like the book. I mean, it's pretty good if you're studying for the exam, I've got to say, because we've written a load of questions out of it. But I can remember having the idea for the book, and it came to me because when I was a medical student, there was a brilliant book called Paediatric Imaging, and it had a picture on one page, and then it would have a question, and then you couldn't see the answer until you turned the page. And I thought, oh, that was really quite good. I quite enjoyed using that as a hard copy book. And I thought, well, do you know what? I've been writing exam questions now for probably 6-7 years. I think we could write a book that would really help to cover areas of the syllabus that aren't easy to access in other books. Because I was very aware that we'd be, setting questions, and then we'd be going, well, how do you answer this theory and science question? You go, well, there's a nice paper in Archives of Disease of Childhood. There's a nice paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm thinking, yeah, well, there may be a nice paper, but is it reasonable to expect people to have read every paper that's ever been published for the theory and science of pediatrics? And we decided it wasn't. And we also decided that a lot of the questions that were in the bank were pretty hard because there was no easy place to access. It wasn't in the Sunflower book. It wasn't really anywhere. It was something that I knew that I thought was interesting. So I set about the task of trying to write a few cases and see whether we could write some nice questions on those cases from things that I'd seen that interested me over the years as a pediatrician. And I wrote a couple of sample chapters, and I went to the Royal College of Paediatric and Child Health annual meeting in York. I can remember where I was when I had the discussion, and I met Simon Newell in the corridor, and he was the officer for exams at the time. And I go up to Simon and said, Simon, I've got this great idea for a book. And basically, you ask a question, we tell a clinical case, and then we write some questions on it, and then they turn the page and they get the answers and they get a nice discussion. And Simon was brilliant. He was ever so enthusiastic. He said, oh, it's fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. Let's go and find Tom. Now, Tom, I had never met before, and Tom was one of my heroes because Tom Lissauer wrote the Sunflower book. The Sunflower book was published the year before I did pediatrics in med school. So that's how long it's been around. So it was first published in 1993, I think, or 1992. Tom wrote it, and it was then in print when I did my pediatrics in 1994. So that's aged me considerably to all of you. But basically, Tom Lissauer is one of my heroes. So I was very excited by the idea that I would go and meet Tom Lissauer and go and tell him about my brilliant idea for a book. So I bounded up to Tom with Simon, who was equally enthusiastic and quite a bouncy individual. I said, so I've got this great idea for a book, got a case, you have it on one page, and then you turn over and it's got the answers and discussions, and then we do syllabus mapping and the references. And Tom's reaction was not entirely what I was hoping for. Tom's immediate reaction was, yes, maybe. No, I don't think it will work very well, really will. Oh no, I can see lots of problems. Yeah, no, I don't think it will work. Well, I suppose if you show me some chapters, I might be. Anyway, so I walked away. I think my shoulders must have fallen down, and I retreated to my hole, thinking, oh God, I'll never get a book published. And Simon Newell bounded after me about 5 minutes later and came into him saying, goodness, I've never heard Tom so enthusiastic about somebody else's idea. And as I've got to know Tom really well over the last 10, 15 years, I've realized that he is the Eeyore to my Tigger. He is my voice of reason, and his moderate encouragement, and not even strong encouragement, is in fact a big vote of confidence. So try not to be discouraged. And I'm going to start by telling you 3 things that I think are important to do. It was a good 10 years of me being a consultant before I started to write my own books. And I'd done a lot of things up until that point. And the advice I could give my younger self, and I'd like to give to all of you, is be willing to do it for free and be willing to work for free. All the really successful people that I know have invested in their ideas by doing it for nothing. And I'll give you examples of that as we go through this talk. I think the second thing for those who are postgraduate doctors in training or in the early part of their consultant careers is that even though you don't know it, everything is a test. Literally everything is a test. And even at my level of my career, I've just come up with particularly difficult and challenging conversations in the last week. Everything is still a test. And finally, don't give up. Really, really important. The only predictor of success in research is somebody who's willing to dust themselves down and give it another go. 90% of what I try to do fails. 90% of everything I will always try and do in research and publication will fail. But the only thing that makes you successful is being willing to keep going and have another crack. So what do I mean by working for free? I think it is important to recognize that a lot of what we do in our professional careers is something that we're going to be willing to invest in time and effort without necessarily getting payment for it. Nearly all the significant opportunities I've had in research or in publication, I've had to, no one's come to me and given me the money up front. You know, I've kind of had to get things going. And that means you spend a lot of time doing things that your kids, your partner, in my case, my wonderful and very understanding wife, are going to have to invest into and go, yeah, you're doing a lot of stuff that you're not getting paid for. And it took quite some time actually for me to get my wife to understand that. And it's really interesting that my wife's the most successful nurse that I know. She's a chief nurse now, and she's worked this out as well. But she came a little bit later down that journey of being willing to do things for nothing. It's like, okay, be willing to work for free. Be willing to, I don't know, talk to the Yorkshire and Humber Society for free. You know, there's plenty of stuff we do in our career that we're just willing to do. And you'll all have examples of that, but don't lose that. It is an important part of our job. This is advice that I actually received from somebody giving a leavers school assembly for one of my children's children. And he said, you know, he'd been relatively successful in social media and sports activity, and he'd got some interesting jobs, which I think young people thought, oh wow, he's really groovy. He's got his own, you know, website and he's got his own stuff. So they brought him back to school to talk, and he was only in his late 20s. But he was really clear about the value of getting in early, because the only other person who's in early is the boss. Completing things ahead of deadline and ahead of schedule. If you can't complete it on schedule, at least meet the deadline, because there's nothing more frustrating as a collaborator or somebody who's invested as a supervisor in missing a deadline and then missing a grant application, because, you know, everything then has been lost and thrown under the bus. So remember, it's all a test. You're being tested. If someone gives you a boring job, do that boring job well. You'll be amazed what will come as a result of it. My favorite Edison quotes, I've got two. One is that opportunity is missed by most people because it wears overalls and looks like work. And I think, you know, I've just touched on that. It looks like work very often, and it's a test. And yeah, it looks like work, but actually it's not work, it's a test. And the second is that you only fail when you give up. Yeah, I've not failed in anything I've done in my life that I've not given up on, because I found another way. And that's the difference between people who get things done and don't get things done. So now I'm going to give you some clues and some tips as the Officer for Research for the College of how to start your publication journey. Now, long before I got a book, I learned to write by writing things like book chapters for other people and getting involved in things that were simple to get published. And I recognize that that is probably more difficult now. It's more difficult because there's more competition, and also because the journals have made it more difficult to do it for free. I mean, I'm very fond of the Richard Smith quote. Richard Smith was the editor-in-chief of the BMJ, but Richard Smith very famously said, all publication is theft. And it is true that all publication is theft. the books I write, the things that I do, the articles I submit to scientific journals become owned by Elsevier. And then they make a fortune out of my hard graft. And I make, in comparison, very little. I make quite a lot as a medical writer. And when I say quite a lot, I mean, you know, more than £10,000 a year puts you into the high paid medical writer group. But in terms of pay per hour, it's not a lot of money. And certainly all my academic work that goes into decent journals is owned by the publisher. So, you know, be willing that be aware that the journals will always be rich and you will not as a medical writer. Let's start with where I started. I guess my first paper of note was a review paper in Archives of Disease of Childhood. It was before the days where there was a strict structure for systematic reviews, but we did a kind of systematic review. We looked at did everyone need lumbar punctures who presented with a temperature and a febrile convulsion? And that was a really contentious paper actually when we published it. But it was just an idea, and I thought maybe as an idea we could answer from the literature. So review papers are a really good way to get started, and you really don't need any funding for that. You just need a structure. And the best model to take is, if you're trying to write a review paper, is to follow a good review that's already been written. Now, my own team are quite keen on doing a Cochrane review or two, but I just give you a little bit of warning there. If you go all the way to having a Cochrane review is not just for Christmas, it's for life. And every 3 years they send it back to you saying, is there any new data to review? So you have to do it again. So you've got to be really quite enthusiastic about the topic area if you're going to take on a Cochrane review. But certainly doing review papers is a great way in. I still resort to letters to the editor. And not infrequently, I resort to letters to the editor. In the last couple of years, I think we wrote to the Lancet with a letter about climate change and inhalers that was quite useful. And often if they're interested in the topic area, the editor will write back and say, yeah, I am interested, write me a letter. Sometimes it's been a longer paper that you've submitted and they say, well, it's not, it doesn't really meet our criteria, but if you shorten it into a letter format, that would be okay. Now, I'm less keen on those, but I often will just write to an editor who I think might be particularly interested in a topic area and see whether they welcome a submission. That's quite a good way of getting something in, and it can be short and pithy. Book chapters. Has anyone on this call already written a book chapter or been asked to write a book chapter? I can't see you, so you have to write in the chat at this point. So yes or no will suffice. Not quite. Okay. Oh, almost, Neil. Yeah, you're almost there, definitely. No? I'll tell you a little bit. I mean, keep on writing, guys, but I'll tell you a little bit about my first book chapter. I was asked to write my first book chapter by Professor David Southall, who was the Professor of Child Health at Keele. And, oh, I like that. Yes, don't know what to write. Yes, you've been asked, but I don't know what to write. I definitely didn't know what to write. I gave a presentation on end-of-life care in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So it was just the local teaching. But I invested in it. I had my hour to present about end-of-life care in Duchenne, and I did I think a pretty good job of raising some of the ethical issues that you might want to consider about end-of-life care in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And it was based on a very specific patient who'd actually originally had their care in Derby and been taken over to Stoke, and we had lots of discussions about how far we should proceed and what the limits might be to care, and the discussions with the family. And I approached that using the 4 pillars of medical ethics, and I looked at some other areas of ethics. And having presented that, the prof just happened to be there. David was there, and he was writing a book, and he said, Will, I'm looking for someone to write a chapter on medical ethics. I don't know anything about medical ethics. So I went away. I said, well, of course I'll do it, David. Yeah, of course I'll do it. I'm a young, enthusiastic registrar. Of course I'll find a way of writing a chapter on medical ethics. So I went away and read 3 books on medical ethics and synthesized these into the 10,000 words that I was allowed for a book chapter. And that was my first book chapter. So everything is a test, yeah? Be prepared to do things for nothing. I certainly wasn't paid for my first book chapter. I did it purely for the glory and because I thought it'd be a good thing to do. And did I make a good job of it? Do you know what? I think the chapter still stands up. As an editor, I think the chapter still stands up, and I'm pretty critical now about content that gets sent to me. So yeah, I think it probably did work. Did it teach me a lot? It definitely taught me loads. And I really took quite a lot of that knowledge forward into my consultant career when making decisions about patients and all the aspects of medical ethics. I also learned quite quickly that something that one of my dear friends told me when he became a world expert in snake envenomation and telemedicine. And I'll speak more of Mike in a few minutes. But one of my friends from medical school, I asked him how the hell was he an expert in anything, and he said, "Well, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king." And I have to say, in the field of medical ethics, definitely you don't need to go very far before you know more than most people. So yeah, there's a case to be made for that. Most of the book chapters that I get people to write for me are quite simple. If you've read some of my books like Practical Pediatric Prescriber or even Clinical Cases, you'll see there's lots of authors. The chapters are super short. They probably take 10 to 12 hours to write and research, and then someone gets a book chapter out of it. That means that I have a ready supply of authors and people willing to help me produce the next possible book. Because as an editor, you have a responsibility to check everything's correct, and it is quite time consuming, but you can't write it all. You need to find good people. But what did I say? Everything is a test. If I get someone to write me a book chapter that takes 12 hours, and what comes back is absolutely brilliant and perfect, that's the person I might approach for a chapter in Illustrated Textbook of Paediatrics. And if they do that well, that's the person who the publishers will approach to do a book. So, from left to right, my first book chapter, The International Manual of Child Healthcare from David Southall, written under the banner of Child Advocacy International. Goodness me, how proud was I? I even bought the book. And then my first book, Clinical Cases. Still like it. Still think it's useful if you're studying for your exam, by the way. We're apparently getting around to a second edition, and the college are going to fall out with me because I keep on putting it down the list of things I've got to do. And then, yeah, Practical Pediatric Prescribing. Have a read, guys. It's good. Honestly, if you want to know about drugs, it's the place to look. Where else can you publish? Well, educational journals are a great place. And I must declare a conflict of interest at this point. I'm the editor-in-chief of an educational journal. So for those who've gone through medical school in the last 15, 20 years, certainly even when I was in medical school, there was this stable of medicine and surgery. And added to that within Elsevier is a journal called Paediatrics and Child Health, which I helped to edit. And Neil's very kindly written an article for us that is still going through the approvals process within the college, Neil, if you wonder where we're up to. So these are journals that are like books, but they're not quite a book and not quite a journal. So for us, Paediatrics and Child Health arrived out of a publication called Current Paediatrics that I used when I was a young registrar to help teach me all the aspects of pediatrics that were just beyond what we find in Illustrated Textbook of Paediatrics. So, a practical approach to things, or how to manage a child with immunodeficiency, or how to manage a child with hematuria, the stuff that it's actually quite hard to look up in a book because you can just read the renal chapter, but it doesn't really take you that much further. So Current Paediatrics became Paediatrics and Child Health. And then after it had been established for about 5 or 6 years, I was asked by Elsevier to take over the editor role. It is quite time consuming. I've just got 6 more articles to edit emailed to me today. by the wonderful Nick Prowse, and it's in the 100 unanswered emails that I've got today. So it's not for the faint-hearted taking on a chief editor role, but I have to say my editorial board, I don't press them too hard. I expect 3 or 4 meetings a year out of them where they give me an afternoon and we decide how we're going to commission content. If you want to write a book and go straight to a publisher, there is a very predefined structure for that. And it is really hard, but the publisher model, if you want to get a book published with Wiley, Blackwell, or Elsevier, one of the big publishing houses, is actually quite difficult. But I'll share another personal story here, because there's a heart on this screen for a reason. And I already explained that my darling wife took some persuasion about all the things I do for free. But Mrs. Carroll had her first book published before I had my first book published. And she was actually partly approached by Wiley Blackwell because she was known to be a leader in her field, but she still had to write a book proposal to them, and she had to know her market, and she had to provide a sample chapter to Wiley Blackwell to decide whether or not they wanted to proceed with her book and to fund, that. Obviously, her royalties were only 5%. I don't think they ever even paid for the printer ink that we used, but it was still really important for her professionally to write a book. And there's lots of things that go into a book proposal that are required. One of the most important is knowing your market. And one of the reasons I struggled to get my first undergraduate textbook published before Illustrated Textbook was because at its heart, I wanted to co-author Illustrated Textbook of Paediatrics. So every book that I proposed looked a bit like it, but was slightly different. And that's never going to get over the bar with a publisher. There's an independent model to book publication, which is now well trodden. And I think Zeshan Qureshi is probably the best example of how to self-publish and to develop a good reputation as a result of doing so. His books, The Unofficial Guides, I'm sure many of you have used in different guises, have been really helpful and very much a resident-led set of authors that would produce something of quality. It's easy to be a little bit critical about the level of quality because it is often very resident-led. Still, the overall package is very good, and he managed to develop quite a good branding there. So I was very impressed with Zeshan coming along after me and doing a kind of independent model. Although to an extent, my publications with the college have pretty much followed an independent model. I simply used the fact that the college knew me and the college publications team to hit a print run and to get things done. Okay, if we go on beyond review articles and we go back into publication, I think using existing data is really, really helpful. And using existing data sets is a great way of getting publications. I've had a couple of MPhil students over the last few years and collaborated on quite a lot of papers where data's been there, but no one's used it to publish. There's lots of examples of that. And you might think that it's all used, and the answer is it absolutely isn't. If you want to get a nice publication that is surprisingly simple, developing a core outcome set is something that's relatively quick to do. You see my name on a paper here for developing a core outcome set for children with protracted bacterial bronchitis. This was something that we did over the course of really a couple of days' work, and that was all it took. We did a Delphi survey. We met with a group of experts. We include patients, and it is helpful and publishable. And I think getting your foot on the publication ladder, as I said, everything's a test. But when a young resident comes to me and says, oh, have you got any ideas, or do you want to do something? One of my first questions back to them is, what have you published so far? What have you written? Can you show me that you can write and help that? And being involved in the production of something even simple like this goes a very long way to making sure what you're offered is a significant opportunity rather than just something that's difficult to do. Yet again, my never-ending academic prowess. If you're doing a research study and you've managed to get a grant, you absolutely should be publishing the protocol. It's a lesson I've learned over the course of my career is you can publish everything, so publish the protocol. Why not? You get 2 for the price of 1. If you look at the number of protocols published year on year since the 1970s up until now, the number of protocols, and in fact that graph goes ever up because it's only because the year was incomplete that it seems to go down. But those are the number of protocols published every year. There were more than 60,000 protocols published in 2021 for research studies. I have a little giggle about that because I can remember first being told someone's published the protocol. I just thought that's just cheating, but actually everyone's doing it. So you've got, if you want to stay up with the field, you've got to keep doing it. Has anyone on this call written a case report yet, or a case series up? Yes, well done. Diane, can I ask you, I mean, you can unmute if you want, if you can do, or just write in the chat. What was your case report on? I've always been advised against them. Yeah, Neil. Interestingly, by people who don't have time to write it for you is what I would say. So I get approached so many times now by saying, have you got any interesting cases? And the resident comes to me and it's shocking what they produce. And it then takes me 20 hours to sort it out and to make it reasonable and ready for publication. And I don't have 20 hours. So I wouldn't advise, I would advise you that you should write a case report because I actually know you can write, but I would have already tested you. So that's really funny that you've been told not. I mean, the bottom line is people tell you not to because as supervisors and as academics, they're not helpful to us. So I don't need any more case reports. They're not going to improve my academic kudos. They're not going to help my H index because it's very unlikely they'll be cited more than 20 times. So I'm less interested, but you should still be interested. But the way to get one over the line is to have a good case. And you know, a couple of my case reports were, we'd seen an interesting case and we thought, well, this must have happened before and is going to happen again. So that makes it more interesting. So if you can find 2 or 3 cases of the same thing, then that's really useful. For most journal editors, they're interested that there's something in the case that's more widely applicable, and or that there's just great pictures. You know, we've all seen the New England Journal of Medicine case reports, and it's just got fantastic images associated with them. The reason they like those is that they own the images, and subsequently they can charge other publishers to use their images. So, you know, journal editors are not averse to seeing great pictures in there. It definitely helps it get over the line. And then there's other stuff that's a good way of getting published. And I said I'd return to my friend who's a world expert in snake envenomation and telemedicine. But I suspect some of you will have used life in the fast lane at some point. You can write yes or no at this point. Yeah. Yes, indeed. So I'm about to have a 30-year reunion with the graduates of my medical school. And in fact, we were reminded that it's probably 36 years since most of us met because it was a 6-year medical degree. And because my surname begins with C, I know lots of people whose surname begins with C quite well. So Catamol, Corrie, Cadogan, Coulson, Carroll. We were all friends. One of my friends is Mike Cadogan. And Mike invented life in the fast lane. He actually coined the term free open access medical education, so FOMED, in a bar in Dublin. And actually, I've done quite a lot of things in bars in Dublin with Mike, but we didn't. Inventing FOMED wasn't one of them. but I remember very early in the course of life in the fast lane, because Mike knew me quite well, even though he was working in Australia at the time, he said, "Hey, Will, will you contribute? Will you help? Will you help get this off the ground and running?" And I was like, "No, Mike, I'm too busy trying to get my book proposals off the ground." So I kind of ignored him. He just went off and did it anyway. And of course, it's absolutely brilliant and it's fantastic stuff. And they go, "Oh yeah, great. This is really good to see people around me succeeding in this space." And I've seen Damien Rowland succeeded with Don't Forget the Bubbles and Tessa. And I've watched that happen from the sidelines. And my friend Ian Lewins from Derby succeeded with Two Peds in a Pod as a podcast. I thought that was excellent. It's like these are all brilliant ways of getting published. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether it's print or however you do it. What matters from an academic kudos point of view is the impact that anything you do has. So, you know, Mike's impact with Life in the Fast Lane is massive, and he's still doing it. You know, I've got a WhatsApp group now with all my old year group talking, and they're going, "Hey, Mike, I've seen Life in the Fast Lane. It's really great." You know, no one's written, "Hey, Will, I've seen the illustrated textbook. It's brilliant." I'm so annoyed at Cadogan for this, you know, because we're still super competitive as a year group. So it's, you know, but it's great to see because it is all about impact. What else can you do? You can get audit published. I used to have a joke in an interview. So one of my answers to the question, what's the difference between audit and research? And the old-fashioned answers would be, you can't publish audit. Okay, now that's not true anymore because you definitely can publish audit. This is an example of that that's been highly impactful. It's from Birmingham and it's from PRAM, actually, from the Paediatric Research Network there. And I've looked at how do you know when inhalers are empty. And this has been really important stuff, and it's massively driven forward the field of pediatric respiratory medicine. So quality improvement audit can be published, providing it's of high enough quality. In this case, a prospective multi-center quality improvement project. And I would recommend to you making sure that you're plugged into your local trainee research network, because they will be using quality improvement to try and get published and audit projects. And collaboration, therefore, is absolutely essential. I don't think I'd get anything done if I wasn't able to draw on a team of people to help me. Now, I've been around for long enough and I'm old enough that I now know people I can rely on. I know people who will produce good copy. I know people who will produce good copy reliably on time. I know people who produce excellent copy very, very late. But I know who they all are, and I know how to manage them as well. So if I know someone writes brilliantly, but always delivers well beyond the deadline, I make sure that their deadline is 6 months ahead of everybody else's, otherwise the project doesn't get done. So my job often as an editor and as a publisher is to understand the people I'm working with. But I only get to understand who I'm working with when they pass the test. And back to my original point, which is you've got to be willing to work for free. You know, you've got to be willing to do something for nothing. Everything is a test. I just can't tell you enough how everything is a test in life. And don't give up. If you want to be successful in research or publication or anything you're doing with your professional career, beyond being a clinician, perseverance is the key. So it's time to open up the questions. And hopefully I can stop sharing and see your happy smiling faces. Because it's quite unnerving presenting only to the wall. I think you're muted, Neil. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Will. That was fantastic, very informative, and a delightful story to listen to. If anyone does have any questions, please do pipe up either with your microphone or the chat box. Just while we're waiting for those, I would appreciate your
please either the chat or just unmute yourself, even better.
Yeah. So I'll let Diane go first. Diane.
Thank you, Will, for the presentation. That was excellent. Just a quick question. Is there like a medical writing mentorship? Because what I've come to realize from a personal experience with things like getting published is that sometimes where you work affect that. So you could work in a unit and they're very eager to get you to go to conferences and present, encourage you to do publications. And then you work in another group, you have a good case, but then you don't have the support of the seniors to actually put that case up for a case report. So I don't know if there is, like
So
a sort of mentorship for trainees, and as well, like for pediatric and child health, would you occasionally put out topics and say, right, I need a writer for this, and give people who do not have an impressive CV an opportunity to try
yeah.
and get
So
in?
let's answer those in order. We absolutely don't go out to untried or untested authors for things like pediatric and child health. I mean, and really importantly, because we've learned from experience that it causes us so much grief and hassle that we don't. Very occasionally, I get something that's brilliant as an unsolicited article, and very occasionally I have someone who's already authored for us on a topic where we've approached their consultant who's found their local doctor. So the way we do it in pediatric and child health is basically we look and we go, oh, I know Dr. Bloggs in Sheffield looks like they're a real expert on this topic. So we'll ask Dr. Bloggs to write this article. But we will say to Dr. Bloggs, by the way, if you want your resident or one of your local trainees to help you, that'd be great. So if you want to invite a younger colleague to be a co-author, that would be great. And the reason we do that is we hope Dr. Bloggs will have had someone who has literally done their audit for the last 6 months that was really boring. And as reward, Dr. Bloggs will go, hey, Diane, do you fancy writing an article for pediatric and child health? Because that's your foot in the door, you see. Because once you've written once, then if that article becomes republished, we'll often go to the first author, not necessarily Dr. Bloggs in the future. We'll say, oh, Dr. Bloggs wrote this with Diane. It was pretty good. I'm pretty certain Diane wrote it. Diane's now working in, up the road somewhere else. We still write to Diane and ask her. So that's how it happens. You'll see that all the time as it goes to the publication. So, but it's different for different journals. And, there's different ways in. Things like pediatric respiratory reviews, we do take unsolicited content. I'm on the editorial board there. So you can write to them and say, I've done this review. What do you think, Dominic? And have a look at it and go, not really our cup of tea. Or we'll say, no, we'd be interested, crack on, but it needs a bit of work, or crack on, it needs a lot of work. But you will get that sort of feedback. Is there a way of getting specific local mentorship? I would really love to think so, but the best way to know for the Yorkshire region is to use your trainee research network. They'll know who the supportive consultants are locally in the region and try and marry you up with someone. So I often get people who are coming to Stoke for a bit and know that they're interested, and they come and knock on my door or email me and say, Will, I'm really interested in research. And do you know what I do? I give them a really boring job to do and see whether they do it. I mean, honestly, and it may feel soul-destroying that they've come to me thinking, I'm going to get a chapter in Illustrated Textbook or something like that. And I turn around and go, I've got this quality improvement project, and I really like someone to, go away and weigh a load of inhalers for me. Would you fancy doing that? And they look sort of a bit dispirited and their shoulders fall. Do you remember the story? And their shoulders fall and they walk away and they look a bit sad. And then hopefully one of their colleagues bounds up and go, I've never heard Will so supportive of a trainee ever before, because that's the test. That's the test. And I guess you don't realize necessarily from your side of it, Tom was testing me when he said, I suppose I'm not interested. He wanted to know whether I'd push on and do that. And he didn't particularly help me do it, but he did watch what I did. And when I did that book and I got it over the line, he rang me and said, would you like to be deputy editor on the Science of Paediatrics? And when I did that well, he then rang me and said, would you like to co-edit Illustrated, which I'd seriously coveted for many years. So, and I now know him well enough to know that's how I got there. It's like people say, how do you get the Illustrated? It's like, well, it was a game plan, but everything was a test. So involve your local TRN. And if they put you in touch with someone who might be interested, and I can think of loads of great people in Sheffield, for instance, loads of great pediatric respiratory people who've got, our vice president for research, Paul Dimitri, there's all those people, but they will probably give you a test. And I'm sorry to be, to say to you, you may not find the task they give you immediately enjoyable or what you hoped for, but believe me, it is exactly what you need. Because they're testing you. It's exactly what you need. If you're coming to them and you've already done like loads of case reports and you've got stuff published, you'll get a slightly harder test, which might be a bit more interesting. And if you've already got a PhD, you'll get a really hard test, but it will be really interesting and potentially with funding associated with it. So it kind of depends what you've done up until that point as well, Diane.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I ask you a question just on that point, Will, with regards to paediatric research? Is perhaps a controversial opinion, but it certainly feels sometimes that everyone who's involved in paediatric research are involved in hyper subspecialties, and it can be sometimes very difficult to get involved in things unless you agree to research the hyper subspecialty that someone around you is interested in. Have you got any advice for how we can better search out things that are related to general pediatrics and perhaps aspects of general pediatrics that you get involved in as a resident?
Well, I did a lot over the years. We touched on it a bit. So review what's out there, the topic area, make sure you know the stuff really well. So it starts with doing a systematic review, and you can do that, and you can do a narrative review yourself of the topic area. But if you decide you want to study constipation in children, you start off by doing a systematic review of the treatment of constipation in children. You don't start off by saying, I want to do some research. Surely someone's doing some research in this. And then what you do is you look through, where's the data? What have we got that could inform it? Is there any admission data about what proportion of children admitted to hospital had constipation? Or if anyone wants a really good general pediatric idea, why don't you just look through what's been referred to through Choose and Book to general pediatrics? That paper needs writing and the data's there. And I've told people quite a few times, because I was a general pediatrician for 11 years, you know what would be a really good paper? What would be a really good book? Right, okay, here's a free book, Neil, and to anyone listening, free book. This book writes itself. Top 100 cases in general pediatrics. How do you know what are the top 100 cases in general pediatrics? You find out what are the top 100 referrals in general pediatrics. So someone needs to go around and get their trainee research network to go through the referral letters and count what the heck people are being referred with. And then what the syllabus should be. What should we be teaching people before they get to consultant in general peds? Well, they need to know how to manage the top 100 cases. How would they know how to do that? Well, I think that makes a pretty good book, doesn't it, with 100 chapters? And who could write those 100 chapters? Well, 99 of your mates and you. So that's 100 chapters done straight away, isn't it? So, I mean, there are some good books out there and they don't really get the sales that they might get, but it's because they didn't do the background work. They wrote about stuff that interested them rather than being able to prove it was stuff that was essential for, practice as a pediatrician. So I think you need to, people need to consider that. So yeah, loads of stuff in general peds. And PARUCI, of course, and GAP PARUCI are two specific. So GAP PARUCI for general peds and PARUCI for pediatric emergency medicine are two specific non-subspecialist research groups that have a process for getting involved in research and then also helping to stimulate what is done next. But one of the reasons that subspecialists are well funded is historically there's been some money from the industry, and it's really hard to keep your head above water if you're just doing it on NIHR grants. It is very difficult. So the number of researchers who can actually say, yeah, from where I am in 5 years' time, I will be an independent academic at Sheffield University or Leeds University, really difficult. And the universities are disinvesting in research unless they can see high levels of impact and high levels of grant acquisition. And that money is not as easy to find in pediatrics as it is in other areas. So we're always, we're fighting a battle constantly.
Fantastic.
I hope that answers your question and gives you all a brilliant idea for a book, which the Yorkshire region can write together, which is, what are the top 100 reasons for referrals? Because you've got to ask yourself, where are the gaps in my knowledge? And then go, why is there a gap there? And you'll go, when I'm a new consultant, will I know what I'm doing in pediatric clinic, in general pediatrics? And I'll tell you what, when I was a new consultant in general pediatrics, I really wish someone had written that book. And that's what we use pediatric and child health for very often, actually, is to try and say, well, I can remember being a new pediatrician, absolutely having not a Scooby, knowing what to do about this topic area. Maybe we better commission an article, because I would get a lot of my information from current peds. How do you manage to get case reports published? Most times you'll be told by publishers that there's no novelty in the cases. Any tricks to get them over the line? Yeah, I mean, you do have to make sure it's novel. Have 3 cases of the same thing. So I'll give you an example. One of my case reports over the years was I had a child who was in supraventricular tachycardia in SVT. I got crash called down to ED. And I think I've got quite a few pediatric registrars on here, so you'll know you get crash called down to ED because they're too lazy to put the drip in. So that was the real reason, because the child was absolutely stable, but the crash called me down. And there was a SHO, the registrar and consultant, that had buggered off and left this child in stable SVT, but still in SVT, for me to terminate their SVT. So I insisted that the ED SHO, because they'd been stupid enough not to run away, put the drip in, and I asked them to put a grey cannula in the child because I knew I needed a decent bore cannula to give adenosine. And so they promptly managed to cause a massive hematoma, and the patient almost fainted, but they cardioverted at the same time because of the vagal stimulation. And I thought, that can't be the only time that's happened. I genuinely thought, my thought was, that must happen all the time. There must be some grumpy sod like me of a pediatric registrar. So I said to all my mates who are registrars in the West Midlands, said, someone somewhere must have seen this. And they went, no, we've not seen it. No, we're not seeing it. And then like 3 weeks later, Tracy Willis, who's the professor at Oswestry now in neuromuscular disease, Tracy said, I've had a case just like yours. And even better, I got a rhythm strip when we did it. So then we had 2 cases, and I think we got a third from somewhere, and we submitted it to the Emergency Medical Journal and they published it. So it's always easier when you can prove that it's not a unique thing and that there's a more generalized learning point. And we wrote a bit about, stuff that amuses ED doctors, like the fact that, up until that point in the literature, things that had been reported to cardiovert had been a bumpy ambulance journey was in the literature. The use of military anti-shock trousers was in the literature, but no one had written sticking a bloody great big cannula in the child, which is clearly one that happens all the time. So we wrote it up and got it published. The other thing is great images. We had in exactly the same edition, in the days when I was still interested in doing case reports, we had in the same edition, me and Millie Lowe had she's now a consultant in Edinburgh in PICU. We had a case of a child who had we thought a tooth had fallen down and was at the tip of the ET tube, but when you get a lateral, you can see it was actually in the piriform fossa. So, and it was partially obstructing the ET tube, and it's called Beware the Tooth Fairy. So in the good old days, we used to have good names for case reports, used to get it in. So I don't think that works quite so much anymore because journal editors are still a bit sulky about it in general. But if you look through my case reports, I've got one called Carry On Doctor. I mean, deliberately go out of my way to write an entertaining title in the hope that the editor thinks, yeah, that sounds a bit more interesting.
Excellent.
Yeah. So make it, don't lose your sense of humour.
I think we could go on and listen to these yarns forever, but I'm very conscious that you are in clinic this afternoon. So I think we'd better wind it up there. Just a reminder for everyone that if you go to our website, we will upload this video and others almost as good as it to the website for people to catch up with later on. But for now, we'd just like to say thank you ever so much for your time. We're doing this for absolutely free. No payment whatsoever. We really appreciate it, and it's been highly entertaining. Thank you very much.
You all have a really good day. Thanks very much for your attention, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, bye.